This was my first ever pixel art from 8 years ago. I made it again recently to see how much I improved, and I also challenged you to do the same. So stick around to see the results. In 2013, I made this fan art for a popular game, Last of Us. If you've never played it, it's a post-apocalyptic world with weird zombie creep things. And this is my take on Joel and Ellie, the main characters. So, what could be improved about it? Well, the size is huge. You can usually fit in a lot more detail than you think, so if in doubt, go smaller. The poses are also really static and boring. They're kind of like mannequins, just standing there and holding items. There's no real emotion there at all. And I can't quite tell if Joel is confused or if he really needs the toilet. We've got random brow lines, the hands are... no idea what's going on here. The lip is really interesting. At this point, my knowledge of pixel art techniques was basically non-existent. We have doubles and jaggies everywhere, just randomly, with absolutely no intention behind them at all. If you're confused with any art terms or techniques that I mention, check out this video which covers everything you need to know. The colors are really desaturated, which is typically good for realism, but in this style it just looks boring. There is some directional lighting, but it's randomly applied and it doesn't really give a sense of 3D form in the characters. And this rim light is inconsistent and makes it look even more flat. I always suck the background, so I avoided doing them at all cost. So I guess I just put in some random squares. And what's going on with this random glow? You know what? At this point, why not? Nice random glow. Woo, yay! It's not good, but it's not bad for a first attempt either. At this point, I was mainly doing digital art like this, so it's basically just digital art in a smaller canvas size with the pixel brush. But let's see how I would make this piece today. I find it really helpful to find reference or inspiration like this from the start, so I at least have some direction going forward. I really love the strong pose, the simple limited colors, and the broken outlines. I wanted to try a medium pixel art character size for this, something just a touch smaller than the Ryu sprite. It can be hard to know which canvas size to use, so don't worry if you're unsure, you can always rescale it if you need to. So to start with, I sketch out the characters. I really wanted them to have strong poses where they're sort of back to back, holding weapons and fighting off these zombie creep things. I used these red floor lines to plan the balance of the poses. It seems really simple, but the floor lines help to imagine the characters in dynamic positions. From there, I sketch out the basic construction of Joel's body. First placing the head, shoulder line, and hip line. In a more static or robotic pose, the shoulder and hip line will be straight on, almost parallel to each other. So if you want a more dynamic pose, all you really have to do is offset the shoulder and hip line, twisting the body a little, as I've done here. I then put in some lines for his legs and arms, a large mass for the rib cage, just trying to keep the proportions realistic without being too rigid about it. I try to balance out the pose by placing one leg further apart, creating a strong triangle shape. I basically just did the same thing for Ellie, except I imagined more of a back view and also holding a rifle. I'm not actually sure how useful a long-range rifle might be in a close-range encounter, but maybe they were caught off guard. I tried a couple different poses for Joel, and I ended up with this one where he's not looking over his shoulder, but he's more concerned with what's in front of him. I first thought this might appear a little bit less protective than the initial one, but I actually prefer it because it feels more trusting. It's as if they know they have each other's backs. Doing anatomy studies and figure drawing will help you out a lot when you're trying to draw poses from your imagination. It really helps to understand how the body functions and moves realistically, so you can adjust it or emphasize it in a stylistic way. It also helps to gather reference if you struggle to draw poses too. To make things even easier, you can even take a picture of yourself in the same pose. Both of these stags are super charming, but the rework has so much life. Beautiful composition and style. Nice work. And we have a huge improvement here from 2019 to 2021. I love the pose and lighting. I started blocking in the silhouettes, which was pretty simple because I'd already figured out the poses. Just had to tweak it here and there, trying to make the proportions semi-realistic. I didn't draw on a perspective grid though because, well, I'm an idiot. It really helps to draw characters in perspective so they have a sense of form and depth. I should have made a perspective grid. From this point, it was time to block in some basic character features and shapes. I started refining Joel first. I keep checking the reference to make sure I get the defining features of the character right. At this point, I'm focusing more on the line work, trying to identify those doubles and jaggies that might be out of place, or to spot where I can use them to help define the pose. As I mentioned in my pixel art tutorial, I find it helpful to use these techniques intentionally and consistently because it can make a massive difference when you move just one pixel. I was playing around with the collar on the shirt and adding in a little satchel, but I was getting quite frustrated with Joel, so I moved on to Ellie for a little bit of a break. When I'm having difficulties with one section, I find it always helps to just jump onto another part like I did here. Sometimes it flows easier and gets you back into the groove. The process for Ellie was exactly the same too. I didn't think it was necessary to do a complete outline for everything. I used big block sections to help define areas too, like the pants and the bag. It only took me about 7 minutes to do this, but that little win gave me enough motivation to go back and fix Joel and then start adding the colors. There is so much technical improvement here. I like the shapes, the shading, the detail, and the intentional double outline. We also have a super cool improvement here. Great lighting with the effects and the fire. If you've seen my other videos, you know I like to start with values, but this time I decided to just jump straight in with the colors. It's a lot easier to do this when you have set colors to work from the character reference, and I wanted to keep the colors quite simple and limited like the Ryu reference from earlier, so I felt more comfortable just balancing the value and the color at the same time. I try to keep the flat colors around a mid-tone so I can easily add in some shadows and highlights without it being too light or dark overall. Once the flat colors are in, I just started refining. Starting with Joel first, started to add in one shadow color for each section, like the shirt and pants. I imagined that there was a light source from the top right hand area. That actually seems to be my go-to light source, and maybe I should work on diversifying that in the future. But with shading, it does help to define a light source first. I also started to color and break some of the outlines inspired by the Ryu sprite from earlier. I just thought that looked a lot better than the plain black outline. And I struggled with the face a little bit. Getting the expression, details, and likeness into that small size was quite difficult, especially with the beard covering up a lot of the area where I wanted to define the nose. I ended up simplifying it a lot and defining features using a little bit of shadow. I think it turned out okay in the end. Let me know what you think. I kept checking the values and the value contrast wasn't as strong as I liked, so I pushed the back leg and arm into even more shadow, using a couple more colors to show that value change. Both of these little characters are really charming, but the new one has some clear improvements in applying different textures, and there's only a month between them. Nice work. Definitely a more organic look in the new version with nice lighting and water effects too. Excellent job. Once I was happy with Joel, I tackled Ellie in exactly the same way, but it was a lot easier this time. I had a basic value range and structure figured out from doing Joel, so it was a lot easier to pick colors this time around. I didn't use a set palette for this either. I felt quite comfortable just picking colors from the color picker, which was actually quite nice because I remember how much I struggled with picking colors in the past. You know, making these videos and sharing some tips with you guys really helps reinforce the concepts for me as well. I'm still learning too, and it's great to share that journey with you. To finish it off, I added in some details to the backpack and rifle, tweaking it and pushing that value contrast just a little bit further. This is so much better. The posing, the colors, the background? I always sucked at backgrounds, so I avoided doing them at all costs. Okay. Let's do a background. There's nothing wrong with having no backgrounds or even, dare I say it, random squares, but I knew deep down that I had to make one for this piece. So I started off with a rough sketch. The pose is getting across this idea that they're back to back fighting off some zombie creeps, but I got this idea to push it even further. What if they were tired and ambushed, caught off guard with a long range weapon in hand? Aha! It's all starting to make sense now. So imagine them in this alleyway or rundown city street with a lot of zombie creeps surrounding them, and also some zombie creeps in the foreground to add some depth. This framing has a really nice effect too because it squeezes the characters into the center, which makes the composition feel quite uneasy and claustrophobic, as I imagine the real situation might actually feel. You managed to get so much character into this. The palette is fresh with a cute animation too. It really feels like a finished piece. The style has developed a lot here, but the character is as funky as ever. Nice work. So when I was blocking this in with rough values, I try to keep the dark values in the foreground and increase the values as it recedes into the city. This is to kind of give it some sort of atmospheric perspective in the city, but also to make the foreground really dark and grimy. I actually used a perspective grid for this bit. The 1-point perspective grid helps to draw the background objects and buildings towards the same vanishing point, giving it that sense of depth. As I said, I should have really planned the perspective from the start so that the background and the characters were designed using the same perspective, but I just had to eyeball it here because I'm an idiot. But it kind of turned out okay, so I'm not mad about it. I put the horizon line around the shoulder level of the characters, so it's like we're looking down on the scene. And that kind of helps make them look a little bit more trapped too. After adding some details and refining some values, I added a color overlay on top, just to start with. I knew the value structure wasn't that strong, especially between the characters and the background, because I didn't plan on doing a background initially. So to help the characters stand out, I tried to make sure the background colors were desaturated so that the characters' saturated colors would really stand out. Contrast. From this point on, I'm basically just tweaking and refining the background, adding in some color variation and thinking about what might be in the scene. Smashed windows, abandoned buildings, foliage and grass growing through the tarmac, a broken down car, a military checkpoint with barbed wire, and of course, the extra zombie creeps. I even added some more texture in the trees by using single pixels and little patterns to help replicate the leaves. I do have a more in-depth video on my basic background process, so if you're interested, check it out. Here's the final piece. Let me know what you think in the comments. Sorry, I forgot one thing. Random glow. As you've seen throughout the video, I wasn't the only one who took part in reworking some old art. Here's some more entries from our awesome community. Thanks so much for taking part, everyone. I hope this inspires some of you out there to just keep going and keep learning no matter where you are in your art journey. Thanks for watching, everyone. I really appreciate the support. You can check out some more videos here, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.